Hello, my name is Jason Leahy, Executive Director of the Illinois Principals Association. Thanks so much for joining me for this IPA talk, and fortunate to have with me Heather Santella, who is the Assistant Principal for Student Services at Tia Middle School in the Glenview School District, and particularly excited to have Heather here to talk about her research that she did for her doctorate degree that really focused in on the becoming side of our school leadership framework called the school leader paradigm. And so, so there's going to be some, just as a fair warning, I guess, full disclosure for people, there'll be some very biased statements on my part, just because the association obviously was very engaged in helping lead the development of the paradigm overall. So, Heather, thanks for taking a few minutes out to talk with me about your work.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you for inviting me today.
Yeah, you bet. So, Heather, before we get into all the dissertation stuff and the work that you put into that and what your findings were, can you just give us tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to be in the position you're in, maybe a little bit about your school as well.
Sure. This is starting my 25th year in education. Prior to stepping into the leadership role, I was a special education for 15 years. And then prior to that, I was a general education teacher in CPS. And I just knew that I wanted to be a school leader so I could impact more students, particularly in the area of special education, because those students are most vulnerable and they show the most growth when we get things right.
Oh, that's great. So tell us about Atia, where you are right now.
Yeah, so we are located in Glenview. We're located right by the Glen. It's on the North Shore suburbs. We have two middle schools in our school district, and then we have K2 buildings and 3-4 buildings. And so we have about 800 students in our building. We have a little over 10% of our students here are identified with having special education needs. And so part of my role in the district is servicing all student service needs for students in my building and to help them successfully manage the school year and then transition off to Glenbrook South High School.
Well, God bless you for being a middle school leader. I say that, a little bit tongue in cheek, but I've got two middle schoolers in my house right now, and it's never a dull moment with those two. And I've had several kids, as people know, as I've shared over the years. So I've had plenty of middle schoolers up close and personal. So sure appreciate the work that you do as you help support those kids during those transition years, right? When they really are going through a lot emotionally, physically, mentally, the whole shebang.
Exactly. Trying to decide, am I a little kid today or am I a grown up?
Right.
Oscillating back and forth every 5 minutes.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, let's get into your doctoral work. So, just to get us into that, Heather, I'm curious, what made you think to go back and get your doctorate to begin with? Obviously, you're a busy school leader. I'm sure you got other things going on even outside of school, and this is a big commitment when it comes to not only the classwork, but then of course the research and the write-up and everything associated with it. So what made you think this is something I want to do and gave you the resilience to get it done?
Sure. When I first stepped into administration, I was in School District 109 in Deerfield. And I have to say, it felt like every single administrator had started a doc program. And when there was finally a cohort with enough of us to join through Western Illinois University, I was just like, I'm in. I guess this is what leaders do in Deerfield. And so I began in August of 2019.
That's great. Well, good for you. And to knock it out here in this period of time, that's outstanding. Of course, also doing it during the pandemic. We're trying to put that in the rearview mirror a little bit, but it is worth noting that working through all of that, trying to do research and everything, some of those elements didn't make doing this kind of work easy by any stretch. So it added a whole other layer of complexity onto it. But Heather, as I mentioned right up at the top here, you focused in on for your dissertation, the school leader paradigm, focused in on that, studying primarily what we call our becoming side of the school leader paradigm, where we talk about the three intelligences of school leadership: personal, social, and systems. And then we break down those three intelligences into the competencies and the attributes that we feel like are really important for school leaders, kind of possessing the heart and the mind in terms of who they are, the dispositional side of leadership. So they focus on that, continue to grow in those areas so that they can actually do the concrete work that's necessary. So curious, why did you pick the focus, the paradigm maybe overall, but in particular focused in on that part of it?
When I first entered the doctoral program and beginning my coursework, I talked to a lot of different individuals who already had their doctoral degree, were contemplating it. And one of the things that has always fascinated me is, what does it take to be an outstanding principal? And when I started doing some research, okay, how do I quantify this and build this into a doctoral study? I was just like, I needed a framework to look at, how do I want to shape this? And when I started doing a little bit more research, Dr. Anthony McConnell, he was my superintendent at the time. I looked at his work. I was working under Dr. Eileen Brett, who was an exemplary school principal at the time. And I just kept thinking, what is it that this individual does, Dr. Brett? How is it that she's able to pull all these resources together in order for her school to make all the ratings to be an exemplary school? And just kind of got things stirring up in my head. And then I remembered, oh yeah, I have this school leader paradigm and we have all these attributes. And I just started thinking more and more about, how can I build this? What do I want it to look like? And that's when I decided to use the school leader paradigm framework on the becoming side to see, how can I quantify this? And then as I continued to read more and more doctoral studies, I read a handful of strength-based studies for middle school principals using a different tool. And I was just like, oh, but I really like the school leader paradigm because this is vetted. It's used in multiple states. It's used as a teaching instrument. And so that's when I decided, let's do it. The one thing that I do recognize also is that a done dissertation is a great dissertation.
That's exactly right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's the best kind, by the way. That's the best kind.
If I would have had more time or energy, I probably would have done a mixed methods and included some of the survey data, or I'm sorry, some of the research group data to get more qualitative information from my participants. But given that this was done, the work I did the last year and a half, that it's just like, oh man, COVID still, we're coming off all of that. I just need to get this thing going. So that's when I stuck with the straight quantitative method. And so I was able to create my instrument, which I know you were part of the team that vetted my instrument. Yeah. And so it was really good to get everyone's feedback on that and then put it out to, what I wound up doing is surveying principals who were in their same seat from the 2018-2019 school year as either commendable or exemplary, and still in the same seat for the 2021-22 school year. And so those are principals who've been in their seat for multiple years, because one of the things I was really interested in is surveying principals who have held that distinction and maintained it for a significant amount of time versus somebody who just got put in the seat and who hasn't been able to ride out COVID. And so that's one of the reasons why I had some tricky parameters, as you well know, because I kept saying, Jason, I don't have enough people responding to my survey.
I remember, yes. Yes.
I was really getting nervous. And I was like, oh, I'm not going to have enough data to write anything up. And so I did wind up having 49 principals complete the survey and 51 superintendents complete the survey. And so just a little nutshell on that piece. So not only did I interview principals, I also interviewed their superintendents. It wasn't a matched pair instrument that I used or a data setup, because I wasn't looking to compare how they reviewed themselves and how their superintendents reviewed them, but just as a group. So whether they were superintendents of commendable principals or superintendents of exemplary principals, just to get general idea. And so it was really fascinating to see how all of the different groups rated themselves based on the attributes, and then just by the sheer numbers, the falling out of the competency areas and the intelligences. And so none of the were.
And just to clarify, Heather, what you were seeking is, as I understand it, obviously being a part of this with you from the beginning, and then reading your results. You were seeking to see, for those school leaders in those schools, what, and as well, looking at the principal perspective as well as the superintendent perspective, which attributes they really identified as being most critical when it came to their success as school leaders.
Right. Their self-reported strengths.
Yeah. Yes. And that, we gave it within the paradigm, there are 48. So obviously there were several of them for them to pick from. So I'm just kind of curious then from, your results, what seemed to really fall out from what people shared with you?
Yeah. And so when it came to I was going to say, it's been a hot minute since I've dug into the actual numbers. It was a nice summer.
No kidding, right? You're not thinking about your dissertation every other.
No. So to say that I have everything memorized off the top of my head,
that's okay.
For the principal groups, the number one attribute, self-reported strength, was trustworthiness, followed by ethical. And then after that, it was being responsive. And so when you kind of think about the role of a principal and what they would want to see as their strengths, that's what we do want in our principals. From the perspective of the superintendents, it was ethical, followed by trustworthy. Oh, I'm sorry, followed by responsible, and then trustworthy. So a slightly different order.
Yeah. Yeah, but still the same three, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is really fascinating that you'd have two different groups. Maybe not. I don't know that they would look at it in that way. Sometimes, I think superintendents, as they look at the work that they expect from school leaders or building principals,
Sure.
they may have a different perspective. So it's fascinating to me just to know that they really are interested in the same things happening.
Sure. And I was going to say, when we look at the weakest reported strength, that's also very telling in the differences between principals and the superintendent groups. And so some of the other strengths that principals reported included being humble, being collaborative, and I mentioned responsive. So they're all pretty darn, like the numbers, the actual numbers were pretty tight as a group. And then for superintendents, it was organized and empathetic.
So this is on the other end of the scale, is what they would say is the weaker of the strengths of attributes.
Those are all the strengths. Those are all the strengths.
Okay, I got you. Sorry,
No. We'll get to the weaknesses in just a bit. The one thing that was kind of noteworthy is that overall, superintendents rated their principals higher than principals rated themselves. Yeah. And then when broken down by the subcategory of principals of commendable schools versus principals of exemplary schools, principals of exemplary schools rated themselves lower than their overall strengths than those of principals of commendable schools.
Well, it's like we were talking about before we hit the record button here. They're just showing their humility, right? By rating themselves lower as exemplary principals, rating themselves lower than what the superintendents say. Yep. All of that. Fascinating.
Exactly. And so one of the other things that I looked at was what was of the intelligence areas, which was the most predominant intelligence area. And this one you can probably guess and don't even, need to even crack a book looking inside my research. What do you think it is?
Of the three?
Yep.
So it kind of depends on the day. I'm gonna put it in the personal intelligence. Am I wrong, or is it social?
I was going to say it is the social intelligence. And I was going to say the mean score was 4.27 for the personal intelligence. It was 4.17, and the systems intelligence was 4.08. And one of the things that I found kind of interesting when I go back and reflect on my coursework for my administration degree, I feel like 60, 70, maybe 75% of the coursework is all based on systems training and how you do this, how you look at data, how you manage a building, on that management side, as opposed to really digging into the soft skills.
Yeah, for sure. Well, there's no doubt systems are critical. That's where a lot of the compliance obviously comes into play, we have plenty of that to deal with in this business, especially with a school code that's doubled in size in the last 20 years, all of that. But what I love about you doing this research, Heather, and it just reinforces things that we've talked about as an association, which is a lot of the reason why we developed the paradigm to begin with making sure that we're elevating and giving, basically equal importance to the work that's done concretely, is those essential skills, the soft skills as they're called. What we find here in the office, and I've been in this seat a long time now, is when school leaders call our office and they're in trouble and it's their fault, and that does happen, unfortunately, it has to do with what's going on the becoming side of the paradigm, that they're struggling with ethics, they're struggling with responsiveness. I love that one is up there, and I want to come back to that in a second. But they're dealing with time and task management problems. They just don't get along well with people, all of that stuff. It's this many times that people call the office at zero. If people are just listening to this, that the first thing that comes out of their mouth when they're in trouble is that they say, I'm going to lose my job because I didn't raise test scores this year. That might be the last thing. That might be the last nail in the coffin. But that's like a lagging indicator to all of these other issues that really are out front and what's holding them up from being able to lead. And back to the responsive attribute, I love that came out because I felt for a long time and talked to new leaders about this all the time that said, you're as a new leader, your credibility begins and ends in the early stages of your leadership with your ability or inability to follow through with what it is that you say you're going to do. Mm-hmm. And even, if you're trying to do something for somebody and it takes a long time to get to an answer, making sure that you're keeping people informed of how things are going along the way and in constant communication. So I love that responsiveness came out in your results.
Yeah. And I also think that was probably one of the lessons learned by many school leaders is how responsive we can become given the multiple challenges that we all endured, and how critical it is to be able to deploy resources that meets our constituencies' needs. And then being able to decide the timeline under which it has to happen.
Yeah. What would be an interesting follow-up study here, and maybe for those that are interested, this might be a future dissertation, but would be to drill down on those various attributes individually and research through, like, what does it mean to be responsive, right? What does it really mean to be ethical? I think with that one, we have general ideas about it, but still working through that. What does it really mean to be trustworthy and be perceived as being trustworthy within your learning organization? So those would all be interesting things, but to see that you've been able to suss that out here as part of your research is terrific.
Yeah, I was going to say, I have ideas for future research too, because what I would love to do is to include all 4 levels of principles, not just exemplary and commendable. I only did the top 2 because I was looking to see what does it take to be a great principal.
Sure.
If there was any difference, but if you got all 4 levels of school or principals who lead the 4 different ratings of schools, that could be telling to see what do principals of commendable schools and principals of exemplary schools, are there any distinct differences in how they see themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. So, what do you see? There's always part of a dissertation, obviously, is recommendations.
Sure.
To use for this research, future research, of course, but there might be some other considerations as well. So what do you feel needs to be considered here with what you found?
Well, one of the things I wanted to share that I thought was really interesting is that of the lowest reported areas of strength, principals lowest was global, and then healthy/fit, and then advocating. Whereas superintendent's lowest was healthy, fit, then global, then transformative. And as I started thinking about this, I think healthy fit is an absolute number one thing that really tells us as school leaders that I make recommendations for school boards and different state organizations to really be able to help push school leaders taking good care of themselves and really being able to find that life work balance to make it a sustainable job. Because as I was doing all the research, a lot of my literature review focused on the state of the principalship and how it's not just the pipeline, it's a hemorrhaging pipeline.
Yeah.
And knowing how dire our teacher shortage is means that our principal shortage is even worse. And what can we do? And this is one of the areas that we can help beef up supports for our school leaders so they don't feel so drained and be able to build that up. I was going to say, with regard to global, as I think if I would have gotten more specific data or a larger survey sample and been able to drill down to those who have more experience in how they rated their global strength, I might have had more information. Because as I see like the school leader framework where they get to that mastering side, when it's plus 5 years, it's like, if you're a brand new principal, you're not going to be worrying about being global. Now, mind you, everybody who participated in my study had a minimum of 5 years experience. They had to be able to participate. But as we look at that 5 to 10 to 15 years, then principals who've kind of mastered everything else, that's when they start becoming more global and thinking about how they can impact legislation and being able to have a larger community presence as opposed to just the command of their school.
Yeah. Well, and that was a limitation in your sample there, Heather, being able to have people that have been in the profession more than 5 years. I mean, you talk about a hemorrhaging pipeline, all of that. We just don't have enough school leaders that have been sitting in the profession 5 years, period, let alone, a certain period of time within the school that they're leading right now.
I mean, when I filled out my IRB, I was thinking I was going to have a minimum of 200 principals who I would be able to survey. And by the time I drove, it was less than 99. And then to be able to, I'm like, I'm grateful I was able to get as many as I did. But it's just so telling of all the changes that took place because there were different people, but they moved schools.
Yeah.
Out of the profession, but all of that moving around had an impact as well.
No doubt. No doubt. Well, let's step back from the research itself a little bit. And let me ask you this question, because you may have somebody watching this that's maybe interested in getting into the doc program, doing the dissertation. You mentioned the number one thing is a good dissertation is a done dissertation. It's the best kind, but it obviously is a significant amount of work involved with it. So what advice would you give anybody that's curious about doing this and what it takes to get through the process?
Well, I love being a student. I have 3 master's degrees, and so
oh my gosh.
You can't do this. And I was just like, but I think I want to anyway. And he's like, and I'm like, okay, fine. God bless him. I love my husband, but I'm a lifelong learner. And so if you really have that passion, I didn't necessarily have anything to prove or in that regard. It's just like, oh, this is another 2 years of coursework, which I enjoyed my coursework thoroughly. And so how to help somebody who's thinking about it. I was part of a cohort group. We stayed really, really close throughout the process, emailed each other, texted each other through all different parts, and when we kind of broke off on our own to do all the writing, we still checked in with each other, hey, I just filled out my IRB and it got rejected. What do I do? That kind of thing. You bought it, I'll send you an electronic Kleenex, that kind of thing to help really support. That was one of the big supports. And then finding somebody close to you who has earned their doctorate degree, who can be your cheerleader and your coach along the way. I think that's really important too.
Yeah, absolutely. Doing it in community sure helps. I think that increases the success rate for everybody involved, for sure, for sure. Well, let me ask you this last question, Heather, to wrap us up. And this is something this year, as part of my IPA talks, I've been asking school leaders, those that are still sitting in the seats right now, because I think it's important. We talked about the issues related to the pipeline, the churn, all of that, but obviously these are extremely important jobs for a lot of reasons. And I'm just curious from your perspective, why should somebody who might be aspirational to get into a school leadership position, why should they continue to push on and really look to become a school leader?
I think anybody who demonstrates a desire to have a bigger, broader impact beyond your classroom walls, who want to see change happen, go for it. There's enough of us here who are willing to support you in that endeavor. We need everybody who wants to step up into that leadership role, to go ahead and go for it. It was one of those things I struggled with for a little bit while I was getting the degree. I was just like, oh, I think I'll get the degree, but will I really do this or not? And finally, by my last semester, it was just like, okay, I'm interviewing, and you know what? I got a job right away, and I'm grateful for that. And it's changed my life dramatically in this ability of how I can impact not only students, communities, families, and just humanity. And I feel good about what I do every night when I go to bed, even if I've had the worst day in the world.
I love that. Appreciate that. Well, Dr. Heather Santella, thanks for spending a little time with me. It's great hearing that doctor piece, right? After all
Oh,
that
yeah.
work, that's awesome. Awesome. Well, good for you. Congrats on making it through, and thanks for talking with me about your research a little bit.
Oh, thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
It's been good. Again, my name is Jason Leahy, Executive Director here at IPA. As always, if there's anything that the association can do for you, don't hesitate to give us a call, or you can check us out on the web at ilprinciples.org. Take care.